something that we, that justified thing we are trying to vindicate? Okay, so wouldn't they then become liable at that point? Or would we become liable to their counterattack if we are wronging them, right, by attacking when we're only justified and not just? Does that make sense? I mean, I'm trying to figure out what the distinction, because it's a distinction that I think, in fact, that from the kind of just war theory that Professor Johnson was advocating, that I don't know we would want to make. But anyway, so if you could speak to both of those, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. The use of force. The international institutions are pretty woeful. Also, I don't see how to get to better ones, even if I were totally convinced that it would be a good thing if we did. The sort of proposal that David makes, it's good to have proposals like this out there. But surely there have been a lot of these proposals. I was thinking of Dick Falk and Saul Mendelowitz's World Order Models Project. And, in the multiple thick volumes that project produced of how you could do this and this and this and this in various sectors of the world to build up a more robust international regime. Well, what's been done? I don't know. And indeed, where we do have the institutionalization of our more international, where we do have more international institutionalization, such as, for example, the ICC, I think that there are some very real problems with this. So again, I'm just not sure it's a good thing. So that's fundamentally my view of that, and that's one of the things that throws me back on the importance of robust, well-constituted states that are committed to a responsible version of justice. I've been working through the parts of Augustine's City of God recently with a seminar, and the function is really to read this very closely and see what Augustine was trying to say. And it's just really striking in there how he goes back and forth from chapter to chapter, talking about Rome. One chapter he's talking about how all the defects of Rome vis-a-vis the city of God. And then in another chapter he's talking about how Rome has really been a bad actor vis-a-vis other societies, conquering them and so forth. And then a few pages later, he's talking about all the goods that Roman society brought to those people that it conquered. Politics is a messy thing, and we may not be able to get beyond a well-constituted state that would be, in some sense, a model of the best that the city of Earth can be.
Let's join me in thanking these panelists for a great panel. I believe we're over time.
I want to add my thanks to Joe for pinch hitting again at the last moment. And just so everyone knows, the panelists receive a book from another philosopher who happened to also be an operational artist and also a POW at one time for 7.5 years in Hanoi, Admiral Jim Stockdale, one of his books. So each panelist is getting presented that book. Admiral Stockdale received the Medal of Honor for his leadership, but attributed a lot of his success to his study at Stanford in the areas of ethics and philosophy. And so a lot of what we talk about becomes important for the practitioner as well as we sort through what this all means out on the battlefield. So again, thank you, gentlemen, for your contributions. And Lieutenant Commander Rack will give you your presence. And we're going to reconvene at 3:30 p.m. For the final panel of the day. So a break until then.
It's almost never the case that we allow the deliberate killing of other people, even for incredibly overriding goods. So, within domestic jurisdiction, there's a famous case of Dudley versus Stevens where 2 sailors killed and ate a shipboy. They were shipwrecked on it. They believed reasonably that if they didn't kill the cabin boy, they would all die, and they were not acquitted. And I think there's a strong intuition that that's right. That things like the right to life, right against torture, some other very, very core rights like that are never or almost never vulnerable to that kind of lesser evil justification. But just very quickly on the cultural extermination question, I actually also think the other side of that is that it's incredibly difficult to do, right, through the course of military occupation. If you think, for example, about the cases of Germany and Japan, okay, occupied at the end of the Second World War, their political structure is completely dismantled, replaced by alien ones. 65 years later, they are still recognizably the same culture of Germany and Japan. The Eastern European states that were, again, subject to decades of very, very brutal domination by the Soviet Union. Again, these cultures are incredibly resilient. So it's, when we think about cultural goods in the context of war, we should remember that it's not such an easy thing to exterminate a culture in that way.
Sure,
Maybe McDonald's. And
Sure,
I would do that, but
I'd love to take a swing at these guys again, but I will open it up to other people, please. Yes, sir.
Just a request for clarification on an issue that both of you seem to agree with you. That is where you start from, that actually force is justified only against somebody who's made himself liable to be attacked. Both agree on that. Jeff even mentioned the words morally culpable. That doesn't, maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but that doesn't seem to be right. I mean, there are many situations where somebody is liable to be attacked, even though the person is not morally culpable anyway, right? For example, your colleague at Oxford, John Gardner, has done wonderful work in the law of torts, totally unrelated to this, on outcome responsibility. There are certain things that, outcomes that people cause, like the enemy soldiers, for example, when they fire, I mean, even if they, on your own account, David, the soldier is not responsible, as you argue in your book, that only the elite. This soldier is actually liable to be attacked by the elite. And I don't care if he's culpable or not, actually, on pure outcome agency grounds. I guess,
I would just say, David and I agree with you, actually.
Okay,
We don't think that culpability is a necessary condition of liability to defensive action. And okay, yeah, and I do think that the notion of outcome responsibility, something like that, has probably got to play some role in the kind of view that David and I have.
Professor Alston.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say to Jim Johnson, just to thank you, Jim, for reminding us of the historic record. I think that's rather helpful, and it does raise some interesting questions about how strongly we believe that historic record has bearing on how we think about the issues today. And that gets me directly to concerns that are starting to surface from listening, David, to you and to you, Jeff. And that has to do with something like the following. The just war tradition, as I understand it, has been about a political good, the issue of justice, comparative justice, not justice in some absolute sense. The just war tradition is not about morality in some abstract or absolute sense, but about forms of practical morality and the role of statecraft. So that said, we then immediately, it seems to me, get to the issue of the status of political bodies of a certain kind. Human beings are never in the world just as a bunch of isolated individuals. We're always in the world organized into bodies of some sort. And the bodies that help to define us are multiple, because we're members of not just one community but many. But finally, there's a political community that we're part of that I would say is not reducible to its individual parts. That is, it has a standing and a power that we lose if we think that we can just sort of dissolve it and see the individual bits that in a sense make it up. And it strikes me that the direction your arguments go tend to sort of dissolve the question of the political body in favor of an emphasis on each individual or each person. Clearly, it's absolutely vital to pay attention to, I talked about the dignity of persons, equal moral regard for persons, but at the same time, you know, we need political bodies of some sort to recognize and to protect those rights. So we can't do it all by ourselves. So that, I think, does really get us to one conundrum here, which has to do with, our responsibility simply by being citizens of a political body for whatever actions are taken in our name, taken by the sovereign, if you will. Now, one of the things that I think is happening at the moment, and Jeff, I don't know if you'll agree, or Jim, I don't know if you'll agree, has to do with perhaps, although it's not been named this way quite so much, something of a resurrection of the notion of sovereignty as responsibility as the medievals understood it. It's not just about control of a territory, but that legitimacy hinges on, something in addition. How we think about sovereign authority has to do with some kind of responsibility. If so, that would be a good thing, it seems to me, but it still means that we do have to think about these political bodies and not just about individuals. So what I don't see in either of your presentations is a real consideration of these political bodies that we call states or polities and so on, and how we are, as citizens, in a sense, implicated in them, no matter what we do in some particular way. I also want to raise the question of, in the issue of just cause, assuming, if we can, that we have a situation, there's a clear-cut case of just cause and unjust cause. Let's assume that. It's often murkier in the real world, as you know. Who finally is making those judgments? If you've got two parties, each of whom is claiming justice, it strikes me that there is something that you each are assuming that you weren't saying, which is that there's some way to adjudicate between them and to say justice lies on this side here, and then certain things follow for you that would not follow for me automatically about the status of combatants and so on. So that's just one of the number of issues I would want to put out there for your consideration.
Yeah, I have something to say about that. What I think is most important to say about states, in my view, which is a kind of anti-statist view, at least with respect. I like states for what they do domestically, and I kind of don't like them what they do to other people.
You can have one without the other.
Well, they do tend
they do tend to involve the common good, do they not? Assessments of the common good.
They do tend to go together, but here's what I want to suggest, that people can together create relations among themselves that can alter their own rights and responsibilities and obligations. It can create new permissions for people who didn't already have them. They can create new rights for people who didn't have them before.
Domestic politics.
Among themselves, yes. People among themselves. So make this a state if you'd like. But relations established among people themselves can't actually ever extend what it's permissible for those people to do to people who are not part of that group. That is, you and I can't get together with our antecedent pre-existing permissions with respect to what we can do to others and somehow together manage miraculously to extend those permissions so that we can, by cooperating together, make it more permissible, make it for us permissible to do more harm to other people than it would have been for us to do on our own. And that's very relevant in the case of war. A lot of people think that when people form themselves together in a state, and the state has these responsibilities to citizens and vice versa, that can give members of that state enhanced permissions to cause harm to people outside of the state, permissions that they wouldn't have had independently of their interrelations within the state. That's what I think is false. And I think theoretically and practically that's a very important claim. It may be wrong, but that's what I would defend.
Yeah, I would want to argue against. I won't do it now, obviously, but I think that's a position I'd want to argue against on a number of grounds, but we can't have a private conversation about it. So.
Okay. We have other hands. I have a gentleman here, then Professor Waltzer and Henrik. Yeah.
Jim, this may involve you in elaborating